Hi everyone. Even as I talk to you, a terrible tragedy is unfolding in Bengal, where a train has been derailed, supposedly by a Maoist blast. As yet, it's all conflicting reports, all of it is speculative. But if it does turn out to be a Maoist attack, this will probably be the second one on a civilian situation in the last month. This is highly unusual for the Maoist movement so far. There was a civilian bus that they blew up a couple of weeks ago in Dantewara. And this really brings us to a very troubling phase of our life in India. I think it's very important for us to really understand the heart of the matter where the Maoist issue is concerned. Too much of the public discourse right now is purely about the violence and the counter-violence that is surrounding the issue. And for almost a year earlier, the Helka was talking about the fact that if Operation Green Hunt is launched by the government, a sort of conflict, the logic of conflict would take over, and soon it would be impossible to distinguish the morality of any of the situations that would unfold. And that really has come to pass. Today, if you ask, all the attacks and counterattacks have become so muddied that it is difficult to dissect who's right, who's wrong, who was the aggressor, who's the retaliator. So it's really important for all of us as citizens to come back to the base issues, the root causes of all that is unfolding around us right now. And these causes really is not about Maoist ideology, it's not about extreme left versus state, they're really issues of justice. We have to bring it back to the bare essentials. If we don't, what we are seeing really is an escalating civil war-like situation in India. Because our country is so vast, we are not really recognizing it, but we are really veering at the edge of a very, very dangerous precipice. To come back to what I think are really the core issues at this are the issues of land acquisition, the issues of forest rights, tribal rights, and all of it really boils down to justice. Too often we've heard the state say that we want to bring development and the Maoists are stopping us. I think the thing that we have to repeatedly ask the government is, why aren't they bringing development to other regions where there's no Maoist trouble? What is the nature of development that you want to bring to these regions? Why is it not consensual? Why are we not asking people what it is that they want? And most of all, if people are confused about, whether we should really have mining, whether we should have big industry, whether we should not, these are at a certain level philosophical and existential questions. I'd like to come to them later. But the primary thing I think that is very important for all of us to understand is that at a purely transactional level, things have to be fairer. I remember when the Singur and Nandigram troubles first began, from a middle class point of view, it was very difficult for people, whether sitting in television studios or middle class audiences, English speaking audiences, to really understand why Singur and Nandigram had blown up the way it was. I remember endless people in my own circles saying, but why can't people move? I mean, if they're given money, why can't they just give up their land and move somewhere else? And I remember I actually went with the same point of view as a reporter to Singur. And that's when I really understood what was at the real core issues at the heart of it was that land was being taken over at gunpoint. The memorandum of understanding between a corporate company and the government was not transparent. No one had access to it. One did not understand on what conditions this land was being given to the Tatars. There had been no faith building in the community, no consensus, the very basic principles of a democracy. And then when there were people who were uncomfortable about it, you were taking it over under Section 144 and at gunpoint. Mamata Banerjee may have played politics with the situation, but what lay at the heart of it were issues of justice. And that is what we have to begin to understand across India with all people's resistance movements, whether people are playing politics with it or not. They are genuine issues of justice that we as a democratic civilized society do have to address. It was the same issue with Nandigram. It's the same issue with Chhattisgarh. It's the same issue in Orissa, where Tatas, POSCO, Vedanta are trying to set up industries, all of it under untransparent situations, taking over land at gunpoint. And it's very important to understand that when it's passed off as national interest, we have to begin to question that. Take the issue of mining, for instance. It is posited as something to do with national growth, with national interest. But the way mining is done right now, it certainly is not the case. Something as simple as corporate companies pay the Indian government something like rupees 27 per kg of iron ore, and they sell it at something like rupees 4,000 to 5,000 per kg of iron ore. All of that is private profiteering for the benefit of some very rich men and some shareholders, which could vary from 4,000 to 5,000 people per company. You are removing lakhs of people under very unfair circumstances to create private profit for a certain number of other Indians. So there is a very basic transactional unfairness to the way these things are being done. To make one really understand this, think of the Tatas taking over Jaguar, a really highly efficient, highly professional team would work on creating a deal which was a sweet deal for everybody. So as I'm saying, leave aside the philosophical issues. Are we creating a sweet deal for everybody here? No, we are not. People who have owned this land for centuries, people who live close to nature, people who have lived a sustainable life for centuries. At a time when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about environment issues, these are people that have preserved these natural resources. You're taking it over when it is not a sweet deal for them. So what they're basically telling you is that it's a no deal. So as I said, at a transactional analysis, it's not fair. At a philosophical level, we really have to start rethinking all of this. That how should natural resources be used? These are national resources. They belong to all of us. Should they be used in much more measured ways? Should it be kept for further generations? The interesting thing to understand is that America, for instance, does not mine on its own land. They are always outsourcing the mining because they have understood that these are resources that must be preserved. So they'd much rather outsource and export the dirt that comes with this and take it to other countries. So one very big issue that people that are concerned about these things are talking about is that even if you do mine to a certain extent, it should be limited. There have to be limits set to how much you'll mine and whether it should be exported or used within the country. Right now, almost 90% of what is mined from India is sent out to China. So they are building their economy on the backs of ours. These are things that do not come out when you're speaking to the government or to the media that has got invested in a sort of idea of India that is tied up with a sort of galloping GDP, a well-to-do middle class, all of which is real. The complex thing about our country is that there are contending demands, there are contending ambitions, there are contending realities, which is why I keep insisting that to really marry all of that, we have to come back to issues of justice. I'm sure that if we did not speak of this in highly divisive political terms, and we spoke of it in just terms, in issues of just, what is just for you and what is just for me, a certain clarity would come into these issues. If we don't begin to understand that, what we're going to be faced with more and more are desperate people who do not see the face of the Indian state that you and I do as privileged people. I think too often people have been asking, why are they resorting to violence? We have a democracy. Why are they resorting to violence? First, do we justify this violence? First of all, we have to understand that they're not asking our permission. They're not asking us, they're not putting in applications in triplicate before they pick up the gun. The gun is an act of frustration. To a certain extent, it may be driven by a political ideology, a kind of political awakening that is Maoist and that believes in a sort of revolution in perpetuity. But what is also true is that the cadres that build up the Maoist movement today, and the armed cadres, one believes, is about 20,000 people. What is true is that it is spreading like a rash across the country. And when you see the photographs at Tehelka, we have doggedly been going down to the ground, documenting the stories of these people, photographing them. And when you look at these people, you realize that this is not really a highly ideological war that is being fought. What is happening is that there is a political awakening. And that is being engendered by the Maoists. It could be used constructively, it can be used destructively. The thing is that the poor people in these regions do not see the face of the Indian state or the face of Indian democracy that we see. What they see is the most oppressive face of the state. They see the police, they see thekedars, they see judicial systems that don't work. So what they're left with when people are not invested in a system, then they take to the gun because they feel that here is dignity. If you're not going to be assured survival, if you're not going to be assured a share in the Indian democratic system, then we're out of that system. They're not stakeholders in the society that you and I are. And so it is very important to understand this in those terms. Very recently, it's been said, we have been urging the Home Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, and as have other civil activists, that let's bring back very base level issues of justice into this war. Even into the counter operation. When we point out that CRPF or paramilitary forces or the SPOs are raping and burning and looting villages, let's at least bring punishment to individuals. We are not blacklisting an entire system. Let's bring an individual sense of justice back into the region so that people again get reinvested into Indian democracy. typically the answer is evasive. If you raise issues of violence, they'll give you issues of counter-violence. The Maoists have done this, so we are doing this. This competition of violence is a very, very self-defeating cycle. I'd like to leave you with this thought today, even as this tragedy is unfolding in Bengal and, many tempers may begin to flare if it does turn out to be a Maoist attack. The thing to remember, as I said again and again, is that the way to defeat this is to take the long, slow route, to keep our belief in Indian democracy, to keep our belief in legality, to keep our belief in issues of justice. Thanks for listening in.